Okay, so we just spent some time learning how to factor. Now we're going to continue with factoring, but now we're going to add on this idea of solving quadratics. So we've graphed quadratics back in last semester. We've now factored quadratics, and now we're going to solve quadratics by factoring, which will tie in a little bit to the graphing as well. So our essential question here is, how is zero product property used to solve a quadratic? So before we fully jump into that, let's do a little review here. So number one, we can guess and check that, or we can X box, and I'll show both here. So guess and check, I know I have X times X gives me the X squared. And then what multiplies a 6 and adds a 7? Well, that's 1 and 6. Since that's positive and that's positive, those are both positive there. Now, if we needed to X box this, which is fine, A times C goes on top, so 1 times 6 is 6. My B is 7, so that goes on bottom. What multiplies to 6 and 7? Well, that's 6 and 1. And then draw our box. And then we get X squared, 6X, 1X, and 6. And again, remember, all of this, X squared, 6X, X, and 6 is just that, because 6X and X is our 7X there. All right, now we look for our GCFs. So I go horizontally. They just have a 1 in common. They have an X in common. They have an X in common. And they have a 6 in common. So there's our X plus 1. And then there's our X plus 6. Oh, and then on this one, I forgot. Let's do our GCF each time. So our GCF is 1. So let's look at number 2 here now. Start with our GCF. And on this one, they all have a 5 in common that we can factor out. They also all have an X in common that we can factor out. So then that gives me 5X. And then I'm left with X squared once I divide it out, plus 3X minus 6. And then from here, I'm going to try to X box this. So we get negative 6 and 3. So what multiplies to negative 6 and 3? So off the top of my head, I can't think. But the way we get unstuck is write down our factors of 6. So 1 and 6 and 2 and 3. Since that's negative, I know I'm going to have 1 negative and 1 positive. So I'm going to look for the difference. So the difference of 6 and 1 is 5. Well, that's not 3. That doesn't work. Difference of 2 and 3 is 1. Well, that doesn't work. So then what that tells us is that we can't factor that trinomial. But since we did pull out a GCF, that problem was factorable. All right, let's look at number 3 here. All right, so let's go GCF. This one is 1. Let's do our X. So A times C is a negative 10. B is a negative 3. So what multiplies to negative 10 and adds to negative 3? And let's go with negative 5 and 2. And then we do our box. Again, our box, remember, is just going to make up this problem here. So we get 2x squared. And then our negative 3 comes from these terms here. So we get a negative 5x and a 2x. And then our last term is that negative 5. Then we look for our GCF. So here we get a GCF of 1. Here we get a GCF of x. Here we get a GCF of 2x. And then here it's 5. And then we have that negative. So we have negative 5, and then quick check. 1 times negative 5 is negative 5. 2x times x is 2x squared. Just spot checking a couple things there. X times negative 5 gives me negative 5x, so looks like we're pretty good there. So then that then gives us our answer of x plus 1 and 2x minus 5 for the factors. All right, last one, number 4 here. So our GCF is 1. Now, we check, we have two terms. So if we have two terms, we should think difference of squares. So as we look, do we have a difference? Yes. And then check, do we have squares? So what squares to give us x squared? Well, that's x. And then what squares to give us 81? Well, that's 9. Also, then we can do our difference of squares, which means we write down our a, which is x, and our b, which is 9, and then make one positive, one negative, and we're done. All right. Now, that was our review, but we're going to use the majority of that. We're just going to add one step on to this. So what's new is we can use factoring and the what is called the zero product property. Let me write that a little better. To solve quadratic equations. So essentially the zero product property, what that states is if I have two things multiplied together, say A times B, I know one of three things. Since they're multiplied together, that means either A equals 0, B equals 0, or A and B both equal 0. It's the only way you get 0 when you're multiplying. So that's what zero product property is. So what we want to do here is we want to check to see if there's any like terms. And then we want to simplify if there are. Okay, so on this side there's no like terms, on the right side there are no like terms. So then we want to rewrite the equation by setting it equal to 0. So then on this one, I want to move stuff to the left because I want to keep my x squared positive. So I'm going to subtract my 2x squared. That gives me 3x squared plus 11x. And then that's equal to a negative 6. Add that 6 over. Now there's no like terms for it to combine with there, so we get 3x squared plus 11x plus 6 equals 0. Now from there, we want to factor the quadratic. So first thing we do is GCF. 3, 11, and 6, there is no GCF. Well, there is. It's a GCF of 1, but that doesn't do anything for us. So then B, we want to check the number of terms. If it's two terms, then we want to do difference of squares. 3 terms, we use one of our strategies, Xbox, grouping, or guess and check. And so since I did Xbox earlier, I'll do grouping this time. So we still do our x. 3 times 6 is 18, and then my b is 11. So what multiplies to 18 adds to 11? That is 9 and 2. And then our grouping, so then this gets written out. So we get 3x squared. This time our 11x is made up of 9 and 2. And then we get our plus 6. And that's still equal to 0. Then we want to group. So my first 2 and my second 2. So here we look for a GCF. My GCF is a 3x. And that leaves me with x plus 3. And then here my GCF is 2. That leaves me with x plus 3, which is a good indicator because those are the same. Since those are the same, we can factor those out. We get x plus 3, and then I'm left with 3x plus 2 equals 0. So now we have factored it. So we want to use zero product property to solve. The way we'll do that is we're going to set each factor equal to 0. So as I come back over here, I get x plus 3 is going to equal 0, and 3x plus 2 is going to equal 0. And then we solve. So I guess that's part B. So subtract 3, and x equals negative 3. Here I need to subtract 2. 3x equals negative 2. Divide by 3. And x equals negative 2/3. All right, so a couple more examples here. We're going to solve each by factoring. Remember, step 1 is we want to check for like terms. And simplify. So as we look at this one here, there's no like terms to combine. So then we want to set the equation equal to 0. So on this one, I'm going to subtract the 15. No like terms for it to combine with, so we get x squared minus 2x minus 15, and that is equal to 0. Step 3, we want to factor. Remember, to factor, we go GCF. Our GCF on this one is just 1. So we can X box from there. So I get negative 15 and negative 2. That gives me negative 5 and 3. So then as I box, I get x squared minus 5x, 3x, and minus 15. Do our GCF now. That gives us 3. That gives us x. That gives us x. And that gives us a negative 5. So then we get x plus 3 and x minus 5. And that's equal to 0 still. And then our last step over here is set each factor to 0. So we get x plus 3 equals 0 and x minus 5 equals 0. Subtract 3 and x equals negative 3. Add 5 and x equals 5 as our solution for that one. All right, let's look at 6 here. So same process. So GCF is 1. So let's go to X box. 6 times negative 4 is a negative 24. And then we get positive 5. So I'm going to get 8 and negative 3. Let's go ahead and box. And I'll do grouping on this one since we did box on the last one. So then I get 6x squared plus 8x minus 3x minus 4. So let's group. So here I have a 2x in common, and that leaves me with 3x plus 4. Here I have a negative in common. We have that negative. We're going to pull out that negative 1. And then we get 3x plus 4. And that is equal to 0. So then our 3x plus 4 can come out. And then we're left with 2x minus 1. So now that it's factored, we can set each of our factors equal to 0. So 3x plus 4 equals 0. And 2x minus 1 equals 0. Solve. I'm going to subtract 4. I get 3x equals negative 4. Divide by 3. And x equals negative 4/3. Add 1. And we get 2x equals 1, divide by 2, and x equals 1/2. And so then there's our answer to number 6. Now I want you to kind of think about, and we'll discuss this in class, how do the solutions relate graphically? Now you come up with an answer, think about what we've done in the past, what we're solving for, how we solve, what we set stuff equal to, and how that might relate graphically. All right, your turn. 2 problems to practice here. Then you have your quizzes. Okay, so make sure we get those done from there, and I'll answer any questions when you come into class.